So welcome to Who Writers Read. This is a salon where writers discuss their reading lives. And our guests today are Diane Leffer and Elizabeth, AKA Lisa Liang. Diane is going to read for us first, and then Lisa is going to share with us a clip from her one-woman show. So Diane Leffer is an author, playwright, and activist. Her novel, Out of Place, published in September 2021, explores what happens to international characters far from home in the aftermath of 9/11. Her story collections, California Transit, Very Much Like Desire, The Circles I Move In, her novels, Confessions of a Carnivore, The Fiery Alphabet, Nobody Wakes Up Pretty, Radiant Hungry, and her nonfiction, co-authored with Hector Aristizabal, The Blessing Next to the Wound, a story of art, activism, and transformation, reflect the diversity of America and the interconnectedness of our world. Besides her widely published and often anthologized fiction, her essays and advocacy journalism have appeared most frequently in LA Progressive and New Clear Vision, as well as in The Believer, Columbia Reports, Connotation Press, Counterpunch, La Bloga, Numero 5, The Sun, and Truth Out. Her works for the stage have been produced on both coasts and in between, as well as internationally. Besides teaching in the MFA programs at Vermont College of Fine Arts and Antioch, LA, Diane has offered social justice workshops in the US, Bolivia, and Colombia, working with lifers on parole, migrants at the US-Mexico border, youth affected by the criminal justice system, and for more than 20 years, survivors of torture who seek asylum in Southern California. Welcome, Diane, while she reads to us from Out of Place.
Thank you, Ginger. I'm going to read the first page of the novel to set it up and then jump into the middle of the novel for another short excerpt. So here goes. Yes, my name is Rennie Mulcahy, and I don't know why I'm here. I'm quite sure M&A isn't a terrorist, and I do not hesitate to say so, though how can anyone ever be sure? The reasons I liked her to begin with, the reasons I'm loyal to her now, could of course be interpreted differently as evidence she was up to no good. You suspect she was after something, passwords, files, the inside track on budget allocations, or you might see she simply recognized that I was, as she was, lonely. She became my friend. She commented, yes, on the decadence of the West, but so did I. I like to think it was my cleverness that appealed to her, not my access. What's my point? If you want to believe that a nice Jewish girl from Istanbul is married to a nice Muslim boy, and that a well-educated doctor who loves his wife would leave her in order to schlep around India with some deprived, diseased nomads, that India has such a powerful animal rights movement that the government is confiscating the dancing bears, and that the only place in the world to buy a brown bear cub to replace the one that's been confiscated is in Peshawar. If you want to believe all that, what is there to stop you? My point is, M&A's husband, Oz, has done nothing, absolutely nothing wrong, if you want to believe all that. And I do. So I'm going to jump ahead to Oz in Peshawar looking for that bear. And he's been warned it's very, very dangerous to deal with animal smugglers. That made Oz laugh. A balawala dangerous? When you can buy anything here, raw opium weapons, I don't even know what you call most of them. Flamethrowers, rocket-propelled grenades. It was all right out in the open. The tribals and the turbaned Afghans checking out AK-47s in the marketplace, as casual as buying a sack of potatoes, when all he wanted was a bear. Oz wandered through the Karkani Bazaar. Balawala? It was hard to make himself understood. The language and the roar of planes overhead, Pakistani Air Force, US planes over Afghanistan here at the borderlands. He was carrying altogether too much cash to be in a place like this. He didn't know enough of anything, not the names of weapons or what forces were fighting and what for. He just kept repeating, Balawala, Kanabarosh. You buy? He'd expected they would bring the cub to him. Instead, he was walking a narrow mountain path accompanied by a fierce young man carrying one of those weapons he couldn't name. They come down from the mountains and into an encampment in the valley. It was the Garden of Eden. It was the place of peace where the lion lies down with the lamb. The woman, beautiful as a Madonna, never looked up, but cradled the bear cub as it fed from a bottle, its paws wrapped in total trust around her arm. Her lips moved, surely a lullaby. Another cub nursed at the teat of a complacent nanny goat, and two others wrestled in play and then stood on hind legs together, dancing like the dogs he'd seen at a traveling exhibit of pre-Columbian art. He cuddled the bear and could feel its heart beating against him. The little animal made sounds that had to be contentment, and Oz knew there's nothing exotic in the essential continuum of life. We're all part of it, he thought, me and Emine, and the children we will have. Emine, he thought, I'm coming home. He would have a baby boy or girl in his arms soon, a tiny human being, and someday he would tell the child how he held a bear cub and spoke to it, sweet thing, I'm going to take you to Baba. The cub looked upon him not as an alien being, but as a loving parent. Tranquilized, drugged, the baby would sleep. And Oz had to believe a little money would cause the eyes at border inspection to close just enough to let them pass. The bear cub trusted him because the power of love crosses all boundaries. And we must live from this day on, he thought, as though boundaries don't exist, as though there are none. So you really think this has a good outcome for Oz or for the bear? But I should also have said, I forgot to say, Rennie, who you met in the very first page, she's the office manager at the Desert Haven Institute. It's a scientific research institute in the Mojave Desert. And as the office manager, like, you know, if you've ever been an executive assistant or a secretary and you've been like me and you tell everyone the boss doesn't know anything, I'm the one who knows everything. Nothing happens around here without me. Rennie brags like that, and that's what lands her in federal custody. So that's the book, part of it. Thank you for listening, all of you.
Thank you for that. Yeah, the Rennie character really breaks my heart. I mean, she just stumbles into such a horrible mess. So many of the characters break my heart. The bear, oh, yeah. But it's incredible what she finds herself in so naively. Thank you, Diane. And I realized that I completely failed to introduce myself at the beginning. So I'm sorry, I'm Ginger Eager. I'm one of your hosts. Jody,
you're muted, Jody.
You're muted.
Okay, sorry. I'm Jody Forster, Ginger's co-host, and together we've launched Who Writers Read during the pandemic for exactly this opportunity to speak with writers about their reading life and what's influenced them. And that's me. So back to Ginger for Lisa's bio.
Great. So today we have a special treat on Who Writers Read, in that we're going to have a film clip, because writing screenplays and performances is also writing, very difficult writing. So Elizabeth Liang, also known as Lisa, was raised in Guatemala, Costa Rica, Panama, Morocco, Egypt, and Connecticut as a Guatemalan American business brat of Chinese, Spanish, Irish, French, German, English descent. Alien Citizen and Earth Odyssey, the film of Elizabeth's autobiographical solo show, won the Outstanding Achievement in Performing Arts Award at the Calcutta International Cult Film Festival. The stage production toured internationally in theaters, the college circuit, conferences, festivals, international schools, and the U.S. Embassy in Panama from 2013 to 2019. Elizabeth graduated from Wesleyan University. She's an award-winning bilingual actress who works in theater, television, and film. She also narrates audiobooks. Her essays have been published in the anthology Writing Out of Limbo and the journal Asian American Literature, Discourses and Pedagogies. She had a column in the displacednation.com for 3 years. Elizabeth co-hosted Happa Happy Hour, the longest running podcast on the mixed race experience, and leads workshops on writing one's intersectional solo show, memoir, or personal essay. Thank you.
Thank you, Ginger. Thank you all for being here. So I'm going to share an excerpt from Alien Citizen, which was the solo show that's now a film, and it's a section set in Egypt, because in keeping with Diane's fantastic novel, Out of Place, it's about me as a teenager in Egypt, as a Guatemalan American of all these different heritages, making friends with my first 100% Egyptian friend. Because I had friends who were, well, you'll see. I had friends who were like half Egyptian, half American, half German, half Egyptian, but he was just Egyptian. And there's all sorts of intercultural stuff. So I will share this now, and I will ask my fellow panelists to turn off your cameras, because that seems to help. I'll mute myself now. And here, well, I'll mute myself now. There we go.
But senior year, I make my first Egyptian friend. I have Egyptian American friends. I have European Egyptian friends. But Hamid is my first fully, both sides of his family, Egyptian friend. Are you going to ignore me? What? You won't look at me. Am I not cool enough for you? The nerdy Egyptian? No! He was right. I was being rude because he was nerdy. Where are you from? I was born in Guatemala. Half my family's there. We've moved around. The other half's in the States. Guatemala. I've never met a Guatemalan before. What's it like? Well, we have our own pyramids. The Mayan pyramids of Tikal. Oh yes, human sacrifices. No, those are the Aztecs. Pretty sure it's the Mayans too. Your last name's not Mayan, is it? It's Chinese. Well, are you Guatemalan or Chinese? I'm both. And there's even more on my mom's side. Do you speak any Mandarin or Cantonese? Well, you're Egyptian, so I bet you're Muslim, so have you been to Mecca? Ugh. My father and uncle took me to Mecca. It was awful. It was so hot, I was pouring sweat. And we walked around the dome about Hajar al-Aswad. You know, the black stone, so many times. I got blisters from my sandals. I hate sandals. I hate seeing men in sandals. And it smells so much like sweat. I got queasy. But isn't it holy? You know, my cousins call me the fake Egyptian because I've never gone to an Egyptian school. I've only been to this school. So my Arabic has a slight accent. They can hear the American. But your English has an accent too. No, it doesn't. Yes, it does. No, it doesn't. Yes, it does. How can your Arabic not be perfect when you grew up here? You mean you don't speak any language without a foreign accent? No, what? No, I don't have. Why are you saying this? I guess You're upsetting me, Lisa. We become excellent friends in spite of me. I study hard and moon after all the cute boys at the dances, on the school's rooftop, staring up at the desert sky, waiting for someone to ask me to dance. They usually don't. I love to dance. I am not good at it, but I love it. And one night, when I am home alone, I can't bear to be a teenager who's not living a fun teen life like in the movie Grease. or to be a girl whose body is considered filthy every time I step outside. So I climb onto the dining room table. After I turn on Maybe He'll Know by Cyndi Lauper and dance. Hear that? That's Bowser. I think that's Bowser from Sha-Na-Na. Sha-Na-Na from the movie Grease. My Bowser singing with Cyndi just for me. Just for me. I love to dance. But when Hamid and I see each other at a dance one night, would you like to dance? You don't want to dance at a dance. Oh, Lisa, you won't dance with me, will you? Well, who do you want to dance with? Boys like Omar and Tarek and Steve and Javier with the cool jackets and the cool clothes and the cool hair. You know, these are my best clothes. You look very nice. And he did. He had formal shoes on and a nice boat neck pullover over his button-up shirt. He'd gotten a haircut. He looked like a guest at a bar mitzvah. Very nice. Just not cool. I don't know why Hamid chooses to remain my friend.
We leave Cairo.
So thank you. That was the excerpt. And very pleased to be here with everybody. I hope that worked for you guys. Thanks.
It was beautiful. I wish you could play the whole thing, because I realize you can, it's more than an hour, but it's such an exceptional and unique voyage that Lisa takes, living in multiple countries. Her father worked for Xerox and they moved them around, and she often didn't get any warning. Just, we're moving to Cairo, we're moving to, I'm blanking out of the, anyways, there's so many places. And it's an adventurous, very adventurous. What's most important about it is that she herself is bi-national, bi-cultural, even more than bi, actually. And I hope that you all have an opportunity to see it. It can be found. We'll put the link into the chat box at some point.
Thank you, everybody, for your attention.
We also list all of the titles that are mentioned during these shows on our bookshop storefront, and we will put a link in the description of this show to your show, Lisa.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. So one of the things that I like about Who Writers Read is that we generally contact one writer and then we'll ask them who they would like to be paired with if they have someone specifically that they want to be with. And so when we contacted Diane, she said that she wanted to be with Lisa. So I was wondering if you guys could just talk a bit about the intersection of your work and what you appreciate in each other's work.
Well, I really wanted to ask Lisa about this because it seems with Alien Citizen, but work you've done in so many different fields. Okay, let me backtrack a moment. You know, like in a lot of Latinx community organizations, especially working with youth, they talk about la cultura cura, culture heals, and being cut off from your culture actually harms you. And I find I endorse that 100%, but in my own life, I don't feel like I have really valued my heritage. But I look at the work you do, and it seems as though you're almost trying to create a collective sense of a culture that hasn't been defined yet. And is this personal healing for you, naming, defining, and living a new sort of cultural entity? Does that make any sense?
Yeah. It's definitely, it's like the merging of being a third culture kid. So that's someone who grew up in different places, usually because of a parent's job placement, but not necessarily, and who doesn't have any sense of being a total owner or having total ownership of any one culture, but absolutely being influenced by all of the ones that they lived in and the ones of their parents. So it's like a merging of that and of being in a family that is, you know, of an interracial marriage. So we're this multiracial family, which is completely normal for us, but in the States, it was, at least in Connecticut, it was unusual. In Guatemala, I'm like the 5th generation of multiracial. So just all the things that come up with that, just having like a Chinese last name and looking Asian when you're little, and then looking like a what are you in your teenage years, and then everybody seeing a white woman when they look at me now, all what that does to the identity, as well as growing up in different cultures. And so I'm just trying to like, you said it so beautifully, Diane, but just like, yeah, I'm just trying to be like, it's all that. It's all that. I'm not the only one. There's other ones like me. And what's been wonderful is finding that when I told it as specifically as I could, people who did grow up in one culture, speaking one language, surrounded by other people in the neighborhood who were a lot like their own families, same religion and all that, could still resonate with it, because everybody's felt like an outsider at some point. And we've all been teenagers. And that's just being a teenager, which you just saw. So I love Diane's work so much, because I'm just blown away at how you can be so specific and true to all these different characters, and you learn some of their language, and that gets weaved into the writing, and you put us in places. And whenever I read it, I just like, Diane's been there. Diane's been there. There's no question. So then when I read at the end of Out of Place that you had, used someone else's wonderful writing about being Peshawar, I can't tell you how impressed I am, because it doesn't read at all general or generic. There's no stereotype. It's just people, it's humans in these places, and all the little things like what they're hearing, what they're smelling, while they're just trying to get something done. And that's what growing up the way I did is. It's not like, it's like the daily moment by moment experience of, this is how you bicycle to school when you live in Egypt. I can't tell you about the president at the time, who was a dictator, but I can tell you what it's like to bicycle to school. And Diane's novel does that, while also giving you this huge, she does, micro and macro. I'm not being very articulate about it, but it's amazing. Everybody should read it. Out of Place.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I mean, I feel like when I try to figure out what I am, I think of M&A talks in the novel about the slur, the insult that used to be thrown at Jews about being a rootless cosmopolitan. And I find that, okay, I can embrace that, and be a citizen of the world, only I'm not, I've been reading Lely Long Soldier's poetry collection, Whereas, in which she really has to, she writes about motherhood and grasses and grasslands, but she's also writing about writing in English, which is the settler, genocidal, colonizers' language. And she disrupts the English, and she puts in Lakota words, but she didn't grow up speaking it. But when she does use them, she has to explain a whole context, because there's no direct equivalent in English. So there's all these concepts, right? And the title comes from the apology that the US during the Obama administration offered to the Native peoples. And it was a typical half-assed American apology that had talked about the conflict killing people on both sides, right? So the word genocide doesn't appear. So she objects to that, but she also talks about the word apology that doesn't exist in Lakota. You can repair harm, you can restore harmony, but to use words to make something, the whole concept of apology doesn't exist. And what struck me, that really hit me, how many blind spots I have. I mean, you give me credit for getting into these other heads, but every now and then I'm stopped short by growing up in the US, in the English language. There are blind spots I have that I don't even know are there, because they're blind spots. And until someone throws one of these concepts at me, I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is. And it's a shock, and it's enlightening. And I always want more of it, but I'm so aware of limitations in a single culture,
Yeah.
But that's true for everyone. I swear what you just said is true for me too. It's like, there's this beautiful passage, you guys, in Out of Place, in which the Emine and Maria, a bunch of people for whom English is a second or third or whatever many languages, and they talk about how English is so hard to learn in terms of the gajillion idioms, because none of them make sense compared to their opposite. Like saying come on and come off are not opposites. They're two entirely different terms, and how the prepositions screw you up.
Yeah.
And reading that, I thought, that's true. And I'd never thought of that. I know the thing about English is OUGH, tough, through, though, bow. It's just, you just have to know what the word is, because learning to read it is not, somebody has to teach you, because none of it's logical. It's the same OUGH and it's used differently. But I hadn't thought about, it's just like just what you said, like we all have blind spots, and it's such a revelation and an opening, and like light coming in and oxygen coming in when you see something in a new light, and something's pointed out to you that has been right there the whole time. But somebody had to say, look, for you to get it.
Before you're in a car crash.
Right, exactly. So that's what I appreciate about Diane's work. I'm always like, oh, of course, right.
How do you two know each other? Diane, you chose Lisa to join you in Who Writers Read. Do you know each other, or was it just through her work that you decided to include her?
We met through theater, but was it at one of the meetings where we were trying to get people of other races to actually get jobs in theater? Was it at that meeting?
Like, I remember I got to read a play of yours. I knew of Diane as a playwright. I thought, oh, this is a playwright. I hadn't realized that she was a novelist and an essayist and a million things. And then you wrote something kind about a play I was in on the BCT, Big Cheap Theater listserv. And then it turns out you knew our mutual friend, Wendy Belcher, who's also an author. Diane knows
yeah. Oh, Wendy introduced us. That's right.
Yeah, that might have been it. Yeah.
Wendy, who had lived in Iran.
Did she?
In Ethiopia, I think.
She did Ethiopia and Ghana.
Okay.
But I think she traveled to Iran.
Maybe what I praised, and we weren't really friends yet, I went to see, you did the production of Three Sisters with a Hapa mixed Asian cast, which if you look at the Russian Far East, there's nothing unnatural about having Asian actors playing three sisters. But what struck me really about that production, and I don't know if it's because you felt you were breaking the rules a little, usually, Americans, Chekhov, it's a classic, we're going to take it very seriously, and we put on this British demeanor. And you guys, it was the first time I went to a Chekhov play where I really felt I was just sitting in the living room and people were living their lives and talking. It was the most natural production I'd ever seen. And that's when I became your big fan.
Thank you. I have to give all props to Alina Phelan, who was our director, because she's a fan of great productions of Chekhov, of which there aren't that many. Because, just read any translation and you're like, why? Yeah. Why do they say this is great? I don't understand.
Who talks like this?
Yeah, who talks like that? And but she was like, this is not going to be an internal, deeply felt, quiet, staring into the distance production. I will not do that. You will all be alive and you will never pity yourselves. And when you do pity yourselves, be angry about it, or be, really pity yourselves, not sort of, long suffering, none of that crap. She was like, we're gonna move this thing, it's gonna be dynamic, we're not cutting anything, we're gonna throw it forward. So yeah, all props to Alina, because otherwise I it's real easy to fall into just playing a really self-pitying whiner when you do Chekhov. So thank you, Diane.
Curious, your book, Diane, like Lisa said, there are so many characters, and yet you have such finesse in following each line that it all just made sense to me. Nothing was unraveling without a very clear path. But it wasn't really interesting that you divided the book into files. And I almost think I understand that, but maybe not quite. I'm just wondering how that came to you. Is that a structure that's something you read or you saw in another book? or did you just decide you're going to just not call chapters, you're going to call them files?
Yeah, it was the draft of the novel that when I first wrote the novel, it was very much like random documents that the government had put together, and the sort of bookended narrator is going through these documents and trying to make sense of them. And they were scattered throughout the book. Even Alula's letters, there's a letter here, and then 100 pages later, there's another one of her letters. And I expected the reader to put all these data points together, because when you have this surfeit of data, nothing makes sense, right? And I was leaving it to the reader. And the editor, Mark Estrin, said, look, I'll publish it as it is, but I would probably have to read this novel 3 times very carefully to make sense of it. And I thought, he's a pretty smart guy. So maybe I'm not being fair to the reader. Maybe I need to make it more chronological and just organize it so that when you're taking different topics or different time frames, you're setting them apart. So I started doing that, but I was afraid I was dumbing it down too much. I really, I don't know how much to expect of the reader, right? Yeah, we know the CIA and the FBI didn't know how to connect the dots, but I expected the reader to do it. But at the time, I'd been trying to get a hold of a book for quite some time, and I finally got it in my hands. It's called My Life as a Spy by Katherine Verdery. And I thought it was going to be, I like spy stories, right? Well, it turns out she was a young anthropologist in Romania and was suspected of being a spy by Ceausescu's secret police. And she didn't know it at the time. Years later, she finds out after the fall of the Ceausescu regime, and she gets a hold of her secret police file. She's able to read it. And it was exactly the way I'd written my novel. Not chronological, transcripts, interviews, photos, just things scattered throughout the file. It was her own life, and she couldn't make heads or tails of it. She couldn't understand it until she separated it into different files and put it in more or less chronological order. And I thought, okay, she's giving me the go-ahead to rearrange my book that way. It's not dumbing it down. If she couldn't understand her own life, why am I expecting the reader to make sense of this? So that's pretty much how it happened.
Very interesting.
One of the things I love about the structure that you chose, which I know I have mentioned this before, is that you talk about cherry picking, this idea of cherry picking and crafting these stories. And then the structure allows the reader to see how all of these different characters, are cherry picking their own narratives to turn this person into a terrorist and this person into a good guy. And it's wonderful as the reader to sit back here and have all of this information available to you and to see just the humanity and the accident really that is this plot unfolding. Just all of these misunderstandings and all of these cherry-picked explanations.
But that is the way the narrator has put the pieces together. Maybe they were all terrorists.
It's true. Yeah.
I believe what I wrote.
Yeah. You convinced me.
Very convincing. Lisa, I've got a question for you. Your primary source of material is third culture kids. You refer TCK. I've read things you've read, things that you've written. But are there any books that you would recommend for our viewers to learn more about that, either nonfiction or fiction?
I live and breathe by the wonderful anthology. Full disclosure, my brother and I have essays in it, and his is great. But that's not why. It's everybody else's essays in the book that, was so incredible and healing to read. And it's writing out of limbo. And you can see how many that's everybody else's essays. And it's by about and for third culture kids, and like half of the essays are academic but very readable that tell you, the studies of what happens to them psychologically, blah, blah, blah. And then the other half are personal essays, people talking about being a missionary kid in Uganda or, being a business brat in Bangladesh, whatever, that kind of thing. And it's just very compelling and I highly recommend it.
Did you read that before you wrote your play?
I actually, the essay in it is about writing the play, except I hadn't written the play yet. I wrote the essay because I thought if I write an essay about creating a solo show, I'll be forced to create a solo show. So the excerpts in there, that's the first stuff I ever wrote. And most of it didn't even get in it. If you read it, you'll be like, that's not in it. And you're right, that they didn't make the final cut. But it was just so, I was reading it as I was writing the show. And it helped me with the ending, which is this happy ending in which I see, like, I just, some of my memories that are so happy, I leave to the end. And reading the whole book and seeing how many people had experienced similar things emotionally, even if it was different countries, different family dynamics, different everything, but underneath how they were going through something similar, just was healing and helped me breathe and then helped me come to the end of my show. I also recommend Aftershocks. Did she go to Bennington? By Nadia Usu, and she's a third culture kid, and also she's biracial, and it's awesome. It just came out this year, I think, so recommend. Hi.
Great, thank you.
Excellent.
How about your source for, are there any other one-woman plays? I love one-woman plays. I've only seen one-woman plays. I'm sure there's one male play, but I've seen some truly inspiring, and I count yours now as one of them. I'm really grateful that it's come to my attention. But are there any one-woman plays that actually inspired you to create Alien Nation?
Yeah, the Geraldine Hughes one-woman show, right? Unassailable.
Yeah.
Unassailable.
Yeah.
She did it in the same place where we shot the film back when it was the Black Dahlia Theater, and now it's the Versus Theater. And shout out to everybody there. And yeah, it's about growing up in Belfast during the Troubles, and it's just magnificent. If she brings it back, everybody go see it. If it goes to Atlanta, if it comes to LA, if you're in London, wherever, go see it, because it was one of the first solo shows I'd ever seen live. It might have been the first one I'd ever seen live, because I'd seen like the famous one, Spalding Gray on film, and John Leguizamo on film. And she is so honest. She's not always the good guy. You root for her, but there are moments when she's not likable. And I remember as I was watching, I was thinking, is she aware that she's telling a story where she's not? Yes, she is aware. She's being honest. She's telling us what it was like and what she was like in this moment. And I just remember being flooded with respect, just flooded with absolute respect, and going, oh, that's a real artist. She's not prettifying herself. Mostly you really like her, and she's hilarious and extremely smart and extremely resilient, but there are these moments. And I thought, if I ever do it, I'm going to do that. And now when I see solo shows, if that's not in there, if the person doesn't make themselves at moments the most flawed person in the piece, I think, So yeah, Geraldine Hughes.
Did you see I Am Not Your Wife?
I did not, and I realized this is terrible. And the next time he does it, I will.
Stunning.
Yeah, I've heard that one's great. Sorry.
Well, no, it's great. One of the questions that we generally start with, but we haven't asked, but we always like to ask people, is the literary environment of your home growing up. What story meant there and how that influenced you becoming a writer.
You go, Diane.
My mother would read Alice in Wonderland to me, which I loved. Although when it came to the picture where her neck stretches so big, I was terrified. I'd run and hide. But you know, when I grew up I don't know what it was like for all of you. We really had this attitude that culture was something from Europe, that we Americans didn't have a culture. So as a kid, you know, I've read melodramatic works, Wuthering Heights, The Count of Monte Cristo, Hunchback of Notre Dame. So I'd run around screaming Heathcliff or Sanctuary, you know, this was great. And I don't think until I was a teenager and started reading James Baldwin, I think that was the first time I took American writing seriously, because until then, we're Americans, we don't have culture, you know? And I don't know that, I don't think that is American culture has taken over the world in a large sense. And then I moved to LA and people sort of acted like, oh, culture that comes from New York. You know, I'm like, oh no, it comes from Europe. So and now of course it comes from everywhere. But yeah, so that was kind of the atmosphere at home. We had a lot of books.
We did too. My parents are huge readers. My dad will reread his favorite books a lot, whereas my mom inhales new books. You give her a book, she's done in a day. So that was one of the, she always makes a joke about it, that my brother and I were so gullible, because she'd say, if you're really good, I'll read you for 5 whole minutes before you know, lights out. And we'd go, okay, be good, because mom's gonna read to us for 5 whole minutes. It totally worked. And
did you read in Spanish as well as English?
No, it was mostly in English. And that's what was interesting, because we were living in Spanish speaking countries. So they wanted to make sure we were bilingual. And then we moved to the States, and then it was just habit. Yeah. So we kept speaking English, nobody ever, I don't remember anyone ever teaching my brother and me how to read in Spanish, but we both can do it easily. It's easy to learn how to read in Spanish, but still, I don't remember any teaching of it. And yeah, the American libraries in the US and outside the US were like a total haven. My mom, that would be a really fun excursion, like go to the library and see what books they have. And I read everything everybody, Americans, you know, the Black Stallion novels and the Nancy Drews and Madeline L'Engle and Roald Dahl and everybody. And I loved them, and I still do.
How was it when you were a teenager and you were living in, it was Egypt at that point, right?
Yep.
In the classes that you were in the literature classes that you were taking, what sort of authors were you reading there?
It was an American international school, so same stuff you guys read. You know, for extra credit, I read East of Eden, but we were all reading. We had to read Shakespeare. Yeah. We had to read, you know, Steinbeck. I guess I just said that. So it was the same stuff you guys did. That's what is weird about being a third culture kid, is if you're not put in a local school, you can really miss out. If you don't go after it and or you're not put in a class especially that teaches you about Egyptian literature or whatever, you could completely miss it. It's like they call it the expat bubble. And a lot of grown TCKs have regrets about not having been more curious and not having made more effort to, because then we do as grown-ups and it's like, oh, I really missed out. Really wish I'd done this when I was 17. But on the other hand, we also have total compassion, because you've been moved and moved and moved, and you just want some kind of constancy and something that you already kind of get. So half family is American, so I got that.
That's fascinating. I just want to say that if any of our attendees have questions for Lisa or Diane, you can put them either in the chat or in the Q&A, either one, and we can ask those. Let me pull up the Q&A too.
Do you guys have any questions? I mean, you've done this, you've already had some fabulous dialogue, but do you have any questions that you want to ask each other to elicit more information, more of a response, in particular about reading, but about anything really?
I'd love to know from Diane what gave her the idea for Out of Place, and when did you, well, I'll start chronologically. When did you know you were a writer, and what gave you the idea for Out of Place?
Oh, but when I knew it was a writer, I did not learn to read easily. I mean, I was having trouble learning how to read. And I remember, I just have a very clear memory of my mother yelling at me because I was trying to read this sentence. And I think the word was garden, and I was trying to sound it out phonetically, and I kept saying ground instead of garden. It was a struggle learning how to read. But once I finally got it, I started writing stories and then putting them in paper and making my little books and putting covers on them and all that. So I also thought I wanted to be an actress. I was growing up in New York, and whenever searchlights went through the sky, I would think it was a path that was going to take me to Hollywood. You know, my parents were so horrified at the thought of my being an actress that they encouraged me to write instead. But I don't mind. Yeah, I really got totally into it. Out of Place actually started the night of 9/11. I was supposed to meet a friend who's a particle physicist. We already had plans to meet, and with some of his colleagues. And so we met that night, and we're all very upset about 9/11. And so we were in Pasadena. And they were very concerned about their foreign colleagues and about the international collaborations they were all working on, because they had no idea. Scientists tended to be very fast and loose with security clearances and to share information and work together. And they suddenly realized that this could get them in a lot of trouble. And they also knew that some of their colleagues were going to lose their visas if they didn't have security clearances. And that got me started thinking about, because ordinarily there were so many things about the war on terror that were so horrific, I wouldn't have first thought about science, but because of that dinner, that's where my mind went. And then the other thing that really horrified me, that just, I think it's mentioned briefly in the book, the phrase out of place. You know, after 9/11, Americans kept traveling all over the world as journalists, students, missionaries, tourists, anthropologists, working for NGOs, teachers, preachers, whatever. But a Muslim found traveling in a country not his own was labeled an out of place Muslim. And that label was enough to make you a terrorism suspect. And when I heard that, I kind of went crazy. So yeah, those things ended up to being the start of the book.
It's extraordinary. And I'm glad you pointed out about the physicists, because not only do you immerse us in place expertly, you became an expert on all these things to do with science, to do with rattlesnakes and genomes and words I can't pronounce.
I can't either.
But you did the research. Did you ask friends and do the research online, or did you go to the library, or did you already know stuff?
Well, a lot of it, you know, this book went over the course of many years. It's the pandemic. Things have been really different in LA. But for years, during the 20 plus years I've lived here, if you weren't trying to break into show business or the music industry, there's so many brilliant people doing science or doing activism, and you know, they get overlooked. So if you show the slightest interest, they invite you to come see their lab or come see this or come see that. And I was always going to conferences. I was always getting, and I'm involved with the research department at the zoo. So over the course of all these years, I was gathering so much information. So when it came time to write the book, sometimes I'd go back to my notebooks and see, or pull out an old conference, bulletin, trying to check to see that my memory was correct or try to get the facts right. And I did a little bit of online research, but mostly it was going back around stuff I'd already been exposed to see if I remembered it correctly. And I'm sure there's tons of mistakes in it. That's why, you know, my narrator sort of apologizes. Now that I know apology is a dirty word, you know, I should be careful with my apologies. But the narrator sort of sets it out. Look, you know, if I got the science and the cultural stuff wrong, please forgive me. It's unintentional. You know?
It reads absolutely expert. So
easy to fool us.
Not being one of those scientists myself. Yeah, it's fascinating. It's so interesting that you had already had all of those experiences and then you just went and pulled from them.
Yeah,
I think that you did lots of research too. Yeah.
Well, maybe life is, that's the thing about being a writer. It's like daily life is research, right?
Yeah.
How about you, Diane? Do you have any questions for Lisa?
I already asked her to. Let me see if I have any
Oh, okay.
Okay, what, you're working on another play right now. Tell us about it.
I am, and it's just been I say I am, but I have, the pandemic really, I'm so in awe of everybody who became more creative or continued with their creativity, their creative work during the pandemic. For me, I went into total kind of like survival mode, and I did work on it a little bit. But not as much as I'd like. It's about the concept of home and my relationship with Guatemala, because that's where I was, you know, born, and the only place we went back to. We also came back to the States regularly, but like to a specific house my entire life. And my relationship with my grandmother there, and how she was, you know, brilliant, but also mercurial. And what is it when home is a place at first, and then over time becomes less so. And I'm sorry about that helicopter, but what I learned was after my grandmother died, I realized, oh, she made Guatemala home.
Oh.
And I still have family there, and I love them, and I want to see them again. It's been too long, but she is who made that country home to me. So I'm sort of like exploring that and doing scenes with her, and also mixing in originally written fanfic scenes based on Peter Jackson's movies of Tolkien's book, The Hobbit, which I'm not a fan of. But I fell down the rabbit hole of fanfic a few years ago, found some very good based on The Hobbit, and realized when I was having trouble with this play, I just started writing scenes for fun and began to realize of fanfic and realized, oh, they're paralleling. Like here, this is Bilbo's feeling displaced because he's in Erebor, mountain of the dwarf kingdom, and the Tolkien fantasy dwarves. And here I'm feeling displaced in this scene when I'm back in Guatemala, or when I'm, so I'm trying to merge them. It'll either be great or an exercise in humiliation. I don't know yet.
It'll be great. But I know what you're saying, I've sort of adopted in Oaxaca, my godmother in Oaxaca, Maria Morales, after she died, I haven't been back. And I still have friends there. But if I can't go to her home, I just can't face going back.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking, see, this whole thing of dislocation and home, of course, I've been doing all that reading. So also got Natasha Sayeh's memoir called Terroir, which usually refers to the soil in which grapes are grown for wine, and the specific characteristics of the soil and the climate and the environment determine the characteristics of the wine. So if you take rootstock and plant it somewhere else, the grapes and the wine aren't going to be the same. And she does that with her life. Being born in Germany and being stateless and coming to the US with her refugee family, and then living back in Europe and living in different places in the US. And each place, sometimes the soil is more nourishing than others, but each place determines her growth and her development and who she loves and how she loves and her identity. And reading her, I got the sense that it's possible to acknowledge and celebrate whatever soil you find yourself planted in, instead of just regretting the fact that, unlike Ginger, you don't have one patch of soil in which you have deep, 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 deep roots, And this sense of being transplanted and thriving, but always being a transplant makes sense to me.
Yeah. Well, they bloom where you're planted, and it's like, well, everybody tries. And
not every plant grows in every soil, though.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, I will say one of the interesting things of having lived in the same place all of my life. I mean, we lived abroad. We lived in Thailand for a year, and I lived in Nevada for 5 years. But most of the time I've been here, is watching climate change in place.
Yeah.
And watching the farms disappear and watching the encroachment. And then, so as a child, I had all of these relatives that were farmers, and then the great aunts slowly died off and the farms were sold, and then the farms turned into Walmarts. And so it's almost, I have stayed in the same place and I have lived in many different places,
Yeah.
And I watched this horrible wave of development come through, and then 2009 hit, right? And then the housing market crashed, and all of these strip malls that had been put up without any rhyme or reason just emptied, and they turned into these ghost strip malls. So it's interesting to see all of that. I have a huge amount of mourning for the land that's been lost.
Oh, it's so true. I mentioned Five Rivers in the novel. My friend who lives in Five Rivers said once, well, I used to live in a rainforest since the droughts in Oregon and the fires. It's not a rainforest anymore.
Yeah. No, thank you for sharing that, Ginger, because it's true. Like, no matter where you are or how many places you lived, it's all changed now. And
I would imagine the deeper your roots, the more painful it is to see that change.
Yeah.
In Los Angeles, that's also very true. I was gone for 10 years from when I was 17 to 27, but I grew up here. Over the hill, the valley was mostly orange tree groves. And now it's all, you know, anything from rentals to condos to very large homes. The populations that were, even when we first moved to the street that we're on in Venice, in 1985, there was probably about, you know, the street itself was probably about 80% Latinx. And now there's 2 original families living here, only 2. And otherwise, who's buying the houses now are people who have a lot of money, because living near the beach, the property is just so, it's become so ridiculously high. And, you know, I could go on and on. I grew up about a block from a swamp land, like which we would call the swamp then, I guess we would call it now.
Wetlands, maybe.
And, you know, now it's a golf course. And so, you know, you see these changes, and it's tough, because I loved LA growing up. I mean, I loved the look of it, the architecture. Hollywood for me was nothing to do with the movies, but it was the older homes, but often the craftsman style homes. Most of that's gone. It's kind of, I mean, I'm not a particularly nostalgic person, but it is kind of heartbreaking to see that LA itself has become such a thoroughly urbanized, cement covered, you know, it's just changes, things change.
Well, it's like the Santa Susana Field Lab that is spewing cancer, I mean, radiation and toxic chemicals in the northwest part of the valley. When they put it there initially, it was because it seemed so distant. It seemed that there was nobody nearby. And now it's all surrounded by residential communities where people are being poisoned. Yeah. But, you know, that's just the San Fernando Valley, but it was like, oh, that's far, far away. I did feel very much rooted in New York City, and the city's unrecognizable to me now. I don't go back, you know? It's like from being the center of the world in that snobby way New Yorkers always called it, but it's the center of world capitalism. There's no place for me there. It's unrecognizable.
My folks retired in Costa Rica in a suburb of San Jose, and normally when we visit, it's during Christmas, and we just stay in their house because we've seen the country. They've been there so long, we've seen a lot. You know, now we just go and we just like are in our PJs and eat, read, and watch movies. But I was there for 9 weeks this time, and so I was driving a lot more than I ever do, and was like, I don't know this. On the one hand, I was so happy. I'm sure this is not good, but I was pleased that there were highways and freeways that can get you places faster. And I'm so accustomed to living in LA. I've lived here my whole adult life that I'm so comfortable on those freeways and highways. And there's great restaurants now that there never were, from all over the world. It's more cosmopolitan. And at the same time, I really miss how when you drove out of my parents' driveway and down the hill, you'd often have to stop for the flock of geese that would slowly make its way across the thing, or the cow, the boom, you know, that's gone. And you gain something and then you lose a lot.
Well, that's it, is you know, I mean, that's, you know, progress. My father would always say, that's progress. And you know, I get that. Of course, a lot of people want to live here in Los Angeles, proximity to the beach, but also to those who are actors and songwriters and that sort of thing. But, you know, you do lose a lot too. And mostly what you lose is a more honest way of living.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunate. Yeah. But our hour is up. Yes, Ginger? Are there any questions or chats or anything?
Let me check the Q&A as well. No, we have no open questions.
So either we solved all the world's problems or we put people to sleep. So
I don't think we put anyone to sleep.
No, there's even more people now than there were when we started. This has been lovely. Diane and Lisa, thank you. You both have been so generous and forthcoming, and this is exactly what we'd hoped for when we, when Who Writers Read was still just this idea and kind of this dream that this is the kind of participation we'd hoped for. And so thank you so much for being such fabulous guests and being so involved and giving so much. And thanks to all of you out there who attended, because we couldn't do anything without you. Let's see, I'm reading something, but no, we're good. Oh, that was great. From Susan, is she related
That's
to you?
my mom.
Oh,
That's my Aunt Evelyn. That's her sister.
Oh, look, this is fabulous. Yes, thank you. Loved it. What a wonderful treat. Thanks to all. Oh, that's great.
Hi, Tanya.
Tanya, hello.
Theater
All the way from Australia.
Oh, I love it.
wow, it's got to be the middle of her night.
She got up to watch it live. Great conversation.
It was Thursday. How's Thursday, Tanya? What should we look out for?
9 a.m. Friday.
Oh, Friday. Wow.
Oh, that's great.
Did Trump and his followers, you know, evaporate overnight?
Oh, we can only pray. See, that's the good thing that's happening in Georgia with, I mean, we may have lost the farms, but we're finally going blue, you know. I insist we've always been blue. It was just voter suppression. So, right.
I think you're absolutely right.
So,
hi, Dan.
Oh, wait, I didn't see Dan. Okay, our next show is on November 17th at 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Our guest will be novelist Natalie Jenner, author of the international bestseller, The Jane Austen Society, and the forthcoming Bloomsbury Girls, and Michael Zapata, founding editor of Make Literary Magazine and the author of the novel, The Lost Book of Adana Moriu. All titles mentioned on the show will be in our bookshop storefront soon, as well as links to Lisa's plays. And the play that you mentioned, if she has a link, the one woman play that you mentioned, which I have not seen. If we can find that.
Geraldine, I'll see if she has a trailer or something like that. Terrific.
Okay.
Belfast Blues.
Yeah.
What is it called?
Belfast Blues.
And you can visit our archives, register for upcoming shows, and link to the bookshop at our website, www.whowritersread.com. Right.
Thanks all. Thank you, Ginger. Thank you, Jody.
This was wonderful.
Thank you, Diane.
I loved it.
Lisa, it's wonderful to see, because of the pandemic, we haven't actually seen each other. So thank you for bringing us together.
So happy to see you. Oh, Mom, it's Diane. My mom wants to know how many cats you have.
How many cats do you have, Diane?
Just one.
She was dancing in the lower corner of the screen.
Yeah, maybe she's been running back and forth so she looked like more. Just one, Lola.
Well, we're lucky our dog didn't come up because she's got the loudest bark. So I have to admit, we kind of drugged her with some CBD kind of calming thing. She can get pretty wild, and I just didn't want to have that disruption.
My door is closed against the cats.
Yeah.
All right. Well, goodbye.
Bye, everybody. Thank you all so much.
Bye.